Hey all, welcome to Film Suck, a Patreon podcast in which we ponder the work of art in the age of crap cinema and television. I'm Eileen Jones.
And I'm Liza MInnelli. Oh no,
Yes.
darlings. I'm Dolores McElroy.
I so envy you. I just, all I could come up with, well, she wears black and red. So that's the best I could do. Oh, well. But you look great. And today we are looking at movie biographies with our examples being there's two new, one's very new and one's relatively new. There's biographies, movie biographies of American stars that are available to watch online. PBS is.
I feel like we should specify documentaries, right?
Yes, they're documentaries, but you're right. I shouldn't say biographies. That's a little slightly different. They're sort of like that. But anyway, PBS is featuring a documentary on Liza Minnelli, produced and directed by Brian David Klein. It's called Liza, a truly terrific, absolutely true story. It's part of the American Masters series. If you know that series, it's quite a good series. And it can also be seen on Apple TV Plus. And you can watch on HBO Max, Hulu, and Prime the 2023 Rock Hudson documentary directed by Stephen Kajak called Rock Hudson, All That Heaven Allowed. But let's do one at a time. We won't go crazy that way. Let's start with the Liza one, which I think is the more interesting one, but we'll see what we think. What do you think about the Liza one?
Well, these two subjects have nothing in common.
Yes, nothing. We're jamming them together.
Of course, gay icons. But yeah, full disclaimer, huge Liza fan.
Yeah, you couldn't tell by the way you look. You're ready to throw on a full Liza Minnelli outfit and makeup job. It's pretty incredible.
You always have a full Liza costume at the ready. So I was really eagerly awaiting this Liza film because I was hoping, I was hoping that Liza was planning this, but Liza doesn't have her Kennedy Center honor. She is an EGOT winner, but I feel like she's kind of like gone out of the public eye, recently, in the last 10 years, really.
Mm.
And I think that's she's sort of faded from, not completely from memory, but in a way that people know other performers of her era, they're starting to not know her, which is a huge loss and a shame. And she deserves her flowers, where's her Academy Award Lifetime Achievement? Where's her Kennedy Center honor? So I thought that this documentary would be the thing that puts her back in the public eye, that maybe, gets her some of those Lifetime Achievement Awards that I think she should be reckoning. And it was really enjoyable, but I don't think it does, if that was the strategy, and I have no proof that it is, it didn't do the work I was hoping it would do, which is educating the public about her fabulous and interesting career. It's kind of for the fans. So if you already love Liza and you already know what she's famous for and you know the history of her life, by all means, go enjoy this documentary. It's structured around her relationships with several of her mentors, which is an interesting way to structure it. But you're not going to come out with the broad arc of Liza's career. My lash is falling off. Liza. Okay.
It's even more Liza than before, actually.
You're not going to get a sense of what made kind of how Liza became famous, or the arc of her career in general. You won't get the shape of the Liza Minnelli fame, but you do get, I think it does give you a good sense of Liza as a person, which is tremendously vulnerable, extremely kind. The thing that was so touching that comes out of this documentary is how what a good friend she is. She's so loyal, which is something if you're a fan, you kind of knew, people do tend to speak about her in very warm, glowing terms. Liza's never gotten a reputation for being someone who's difficult to work with, but it's very touching how much she invested in her friendships. And one can surmise, that it's because her family life was so difficult. But also what it doesn't give you is all the trauma of her early life, which certainly existed. But Liza's involved in the making of this film. And it follows that there's very little dirt in this documentary because Liza grew up the daughter of famous people, and she has a code about that. I mean, she doesn't spill other people's dirt. She's never talked about her parents in a way that was like revealing, and she's not
Mhm.
going to talk about herself that way. So if
Mhm.
you're hoping for like a warts and all, this ain't it. But
Mhm.
I still think it's meaningful, and there are lots of like interesting things to learn about her like artistic life and influences. So I'll say that for
Mm.
my piece. What
Okay. Well, I agree, and because I know, obviously, I know enough about her that, and full disclosure, we've already done a Liza Minnelli, but that's okay because we're doing also going to talk broadly at the end. I think we can say some things about documentaries about that are biographical
Yeah.
in the end about movie stars especially. But yeah, I loved the structure for that reason because it was sort of made for me. It's very hard for me how often, if you watch just in general, if you watch documentaries about people's lives, they tend to be very rote and formulaic, and they just do a march. There'll be something in the beginning that's contemporary somehow, or something that links to a present something, and then they go back and they just go march through childhood, and they're usually they can be a little dull, and for that reason. This was nice because literally it's like, now we're going to talk about this mentor, Kay Thompson, and now we're going to talk about, what, Fred Ebb, and now we're going to talk about Halston, and now we're going to talk about Bob Fosse. And so you get these sections that just has a lot more structure than you normally get. There's an angle here that they're working, which is nice. I also liked that we both get the sense of the Liza that we tend to know, which is just absolutely exuberant and gushingly friendly and outgoing, and practically trying to reach through screens to get to you to be your friend. You feel like, so that's very well represented because there's a ton about, and I did like that about the friendships that she's very much built her life on and around. Um, but you also get in the present day stuff, you get to see her do Imperious Diva, which I don't know that I have ever seen.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, well, goddamn. I mean, she's literally telling the director, what's his name? I just said his name, Brian David Klein, how to shoot it. And she's like, director's daughter. So that's that. No, raise the camera, blah, do this, do this, do this. But very super diva, such as I have never seen. I was like, and they're just gonna let it stand. I was thrilled. I was like, okay, so now there's a real tension between that. Been
Yeah.
around forever, been
Yeah.
in showbiz forever, doesn't
Mhm,
suffer fools gladly, is
mhm.
just going to say it right out, like what she wants and how to do it and everything else, and people aren't gonna mess with her. But then within all this background footage, it's just full out Liza, just love, 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 all over the place. So
Yeah.
that was a nice tension, and again, rarely caught on camera, at least as far as I know. Maybe you know
Yeah,
everything.
I'm familiar with like a little bit of it, but you're right. It's not part of the public persona.
No, 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 no. So that she obviously must have approved it and said, "Fine."
Yeah.
So fine. And it actually was kind of nice because there's more there than just. There's always been something kind of girlish about her,
Yeah.
no matter her age. Always a kind of the girlish, gushy thing.
Mhm.
And it was nice to see actually that she's just like very tough. Very tough, knowledgeable, and just not going to take any shit, which was just like, wow, okay, then. So that was nice to see that something impressive. It touched on things that I just happened to be interested in, and we can get to them more later. But things that I've been interested in about like the work is so unbelievable. Even as hard as show business tends to be, even movie making is hard. I mean, it's hard to convey. I mean, they make it as easy as start on stars as they can,
Mhm.
but it's a grueling process, no matter what. It really is. As pampered as you are, you have to just be there forever. It's super boring and technical. You just have to gut it out and last. Shoots are super unforgiving. If they go on for months, I don't and months and months. I only ever did indie films.
Yeah.
Necessarily short. How people go on for 6 months or whatever. You must be going out of your mind. And of course, on stage is just, my God, insane. So to watch her in, like the great specials built around her stage show is to just see somebody spend everything. And of course, her mother did the same. So the same kind of, I will just go till I'm just ready to drop. And she just pours sweat her hair is stuck to her head.
Yeah.
I mean, because she's dancing and singing and doing everything, and it's all full out. So it's always been fascinating. Anyone who's going to work that hard, like above and beyond the call, it's going to be hard anyway. And then you just go for it even beyond that. So that they had these nice tidbits. Like the best one is that Halston, who famously designs her look, her stardom look, says the sweat. We got to deal with the sweat. And guess what will disguise the sweat? Sequins. All the unlikely things, but as soon as he says it, you're like, oh my God, that's brilliant. That's
Yeah.
really brilliant. You're never going to see it on her clothes.
Uh-huh.
Wonderful. And you do see her come off stage in one shot, and the first thing is there's an assistant to put a big old white towel over her head because she's just soaked. So that is kind of a fascinating aspect of her because it shows on her, even with the sequence. You are in no doubt. So there's a lot of never let them see you sweat. That's supposed to be a kind of value and it is for just a lot of entertainers trying to make it look easy when it isn't. It's just like, no, because she so wants to entertain you to the max of her ability.
Yeah.
Yeah, she'll just drive herself. So that's fascinating. And then the gang of friends who tend to be talented people in the business.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a very funny, kind of touching. I meant to look up the guy's name. He was in Glee, Darren something.
Chris.
Yeah, Darren Chris. Yeah. He tells us funny story of being at a Liza Minnelli party, I guess, or somebody's party.
Jealous.
Yeah, I know. And people were getting up and doing, of course, you think it was Judy Garland's day. They're all getting up and entertaining each other and singing and performing. So he gets up and does a song, and he sings wonderfully. He's one of the Glee kids. And at the end of it, she says something like, well, now you're one of the gang. And he both says, well, just think how many times she's probably said that. You know, up and coming talent who desperately want to hear it. But at the same time, how thrilled he was. Like, now you're in the gang. Exactly. You're one of us.
And wait, I think he was like at that party with Liza, Michael Feinstein, and Mitzi Gaynor.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot. It was like, how old is Mitzi Gaynor now? Oh my God. Yeah. But anyway, so that was really interesting, and just the idea that she went out of her way to make very deliberately from a young age to make a life built on that, which I think is so wise.
Yeah,
the wisest thing she ever did.
She doesn't get enough credit because she looks so kooky, but I'm so glad, like, I mean, she does, I think, have probably like a real core. Mm-hmm. And I think people don't know, after her mother died, Judy left debts all around the world. In like
every out on hotel bills all the time.
Yeah. And there are very like charming, funny stories that, like the kids, Lorna left her other daughter, and Liza have told throughout the years about, Judy making a game out of skipping out of hotels,
all wearing multiple layers of their clothing so they could bring as much of their clothing as possible.
Yeah. Very funny, charming, also somewhat abusive and humiliating. So, after her mother died and Liza started getting a little success, Liza went around the world, like settling debts, which she didn't have to do legally. She does not have to clear her mother's name, but she did. And she was the one who arranged the funeral when her mother died, and all that stuff. And I think
the funeral thing, when you see, that's one bit of footage you do see. She gets out of the limo with her little sisters, and she's a child, and she's dressed in her childlike style that she was wearing before Halston remade her. But she's so young.
Yeah,
it's just
23.
Is she 23? And but she looks even younger, and you're like, and she's shouldering this whole, she's shepherding her younger siblings. She planned the funeral, and she's like, she's really young. Yeah. So anyway, carry on. Yeah.
No, that's exactly right. But I think she's always had, so she's carried a heavy load her whole life. And I think she's always served a like protective function for her family, protecting her mother, literally and figuratively, like from the press, and the same thing with her siblings, shielding them from the horrors, although she certainly did not completely shield them. They experienced quite a few of the horrors. But she's also like, very smart. And in interviews, especially when she's sobered up in the 80s, like she's very good at answering. She knows exactly what like the gossip industry wants, and she's not going to give it to them. She actually like, you can't, she's got quite a stubborn streak. Like you can't get from Liza what she doesn't want to give, but what she wants to give, she will give until she bleeds,
Yeah.
So I think that people do think of her as like flightier than she is. I think she's like quite strong in certain ways,
In certain ways. Well, that's what another fascination is like presenting that Liza really has a big problem, but it's the most rarefied problem you can have, which is everyone can see she's ungodly talented, like
Mhm.
insanely talented. But how can she separate her star persona from her mother's
Mhm.
overwhelming, legendary, colossal star persona? That's the big problem of her early career. And you're like, oh, to have a problem like that, but it's still a real problem,
Yeah.
heavy duty on your personal life, all this work and thought, and that's, the beginning of the bringing in of the mentors who are going to help her build this persona away from her mother, whom she, reveres her mother's talent, but no one will. The interviews where she's just like, I would just love never to have to answer another question about my mother. I
Yeah.
mean, everyone just obsessing on that relationship. It's partly understandable because it's so fascinating.
It
Judy
is.
Garland's so insanely talented, and then Liza Minnelli is so insanely talented, and you're just
And
like,
they look alike.
and they look alike, and they both have those big bravura voices, and there's enough comparison that it is like, oh yeah, they must just get so awful. So, but it's also hilarious. I'm sorry that's
Yeah, that's a problem.
yeah. So it's kind of not at all relatable, but it's so fascinating anyway, just because as crazy as it is to as a problem. So that's a lot of the mentor kind of theme is how do we bring Liza out as her own person and her own star.
And it's so interesting the different answers to that. Like so the film begins with like Judy's funeral, which is
Yeah.
such an interesting
Yeah.
choice.
Yeah. Yeah.
They introduce in text the fact that Liza Minnelli is Judy Garland's daughter and Vincent Minnelli's daughter.
Mhm.
But they don't like show footage of her being born, and the first like real footage that rolls is, the Frank E. Campbell Memorial Home, on the Upper
Mhm.
East Side, a
Mhm.
couple days after Judy Garland has died. And
Mhm.
it's true, the film frames Garland's death as Liza's birth, in a sense,
Mhm.
as a star, which is, dark and also true.
Mhm.
And so it's like, and you have to know that. If you don't know who Judy Garland is, and you don't know like the tragedy surrounding her death, then like
Mhm.
this film is not going to do that work for you.
Yeah,
Like,
we
it
wanna do it.
assumes you know.
Yeah.
Um, but it's so
No,
interesting.
it does do a few things. I think there's a flashback, and there's one that's really hard to watch where everyone could see she had super talent, and her mother was bringing her out in her own shows, and she would be singing. And there's this scene where it's clear that Judy Garland is suddenly like, and it's a famous thing.
It's
You
at
know,
the
you re-
Palladium in
she realizes she's got a rival, not just a daughter that she's nurturing, but she's got a rival, and she doesn't like it.
Yep, yep.
And there's a kind of trying to squelch and minimize that you're like, whoa. But it's so
Yep.
that's kind of rough. So you can see, yes, I think someone comments on as terrible and as traumatic as it is to lose her mother and she adores her mother, it's liberates her in a way that was necessary for her to ever be her own star. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. In another context, not in this documentary, but Liza tells a story about that. So it was a show at the London Palladium in 1964, and Liza was only 18 years old. And Judy asked her to do this show because Judy's powers were failing and she wasn't sure she could carry it.
Mhm.
And then, yeah, Liza started doing a good job, and Judy did some things to diminish her. But
Yeah.
Liza tells a story of like, her mother walking off the stage and walking back on, and it's no longer her mother, and it's Judy Garland. And she's there to like one up her. And I just remember Liza says this thing. She says, "Keep going, Minnelli," and I say that to myself sometimes. I'm just like, "Keep going." That's why I'm in psychosis. But so I thought it was really cool, and you're so right. And they within this documentary, they offer one more story, which I hadn't heard, but I guess
Mhm.
it. Liza had a nightclub act before Cabaret, before her mother had passed away in the late '60s, and she was getting like quite famous. Like Liza played
Mhm.
like the Olympia in Paris, before Cabaret, before her mom died,
Mhm.
and I think this was that show, and her mother was coming, and and it was quite successful. And then Judy came backstage and said to Liza, like, oh, you did a great job. And then like patted her on the knee and said, like, this is what we always wanted, darling.
Oh,
Isn't it?
right. That's what they do. They quote that one. I couldn't remember what one they quoted. That was the one.
And it like ruined Liza's night. I think it would ruin mine too. I don't know. It feels creepy.
Oh yeah, it was creepy. It was creepy. Yes.
I also never heard that before, honestly. In everything I've read, I never heard that like Judy was eager for Liza to be famous. Yeah. And maybe, who knows, maybe just on that night she felt like saying that, who knows if that was like a theme. I don't know. It sounded like it surprised Liza, She's like, really? That was your plan? It's Judy taking credit for it,
Right.
Things.
And they get into the first mentor, which ironically is Kay Thompson.
Who's also Judy Garland's mentor in a sense.
Judy Garland's mentor. And, what is she? She said, what? Composer, arranger, I forget what do you even call her? Entertainer, wrote the Eloise stories. They list them all in the movie, but she's the fabulous Kay Thompson. Think Pink, you watch Funny Face, you get Kay Thompson like that. Her whole persona comes across. But that your first mentor is your mother's mentor is like, but yeah, it's at the same time, it sounds like she was really helping her, at least in some ways, to start separating herself. While at the same time, then they do end on this, which is very sad, that she was a frustrated performer herself who knew how great she was, but felt her looks were holding her back from full stardom. And there she was nurturing other people who were going to get to be much bigger stars than she was. And so sometimes it would get a little ugly, and they didn't really go into what that meant. But maybe they didn't stress enough. She lived in Liza Minnelli's house until she died, and she would live to be old.
Yeah.
So she was her caregiver and like housemaid basically. And what that must have been like, is she got to be, I forget how old, but she was old when she died.
Old. Yeah. And Liza had like round the clock care for her. She lived in her home. Yeah. I think what came out of this for me, which I didn't know, is that current of jealousy that so many people had. Kay Thompson occasionally said insulting things about Liza, that revealed jealousy, and Fred Ebb of Candor and Ebb, who had a huge hand in like shaping her act, was mad that he wasn't Liza. And that's awful. What an awful thing to be surrounded by.
Yes. Among your best and closest friends and your mentors, and yes, but at the same time, it's a vicious business. God, it's a vicious business.
Yeah,
fame makes people crazy. That's not made up. Yeah.
No wonder she was so caring of her friendships. I mean, she probably had like so many examples of people turning on each other.
Oh my God, yeah.
I thought it was interesting the things that the mentors did to separate her from Judy were to play up her. There are unique things about Liza, like when she worked with Fosse, I learned from the documentary that she has scoliosis. And so she's kind of like misaligned. And this is a great genius of Bob Fosse anyway. Fosse himself was a little like knock-kneed, I guess. And so he worked that into a lot of his choreography. And it was the same with Liza and her like spinal misalignment. You kind of work with the body's quirks. She was also much more of a dancer than Judy was. I mean, Judy could certainly like dance, but not quite at the level. Like, you're not going to see Judy Garland do a dance solo, but you will see Liza Minnelli do a dance solo, So I think her dancing distinguishes her, and like just in terms of like the way she carries herself, like Liza's a little like sexier, so I think she like cultivated that. Liza wears clothes much better than Judy wears clothes.
Oh God, much.
Yeah.
No.
Woo, Judy's got no fashion game.
And maybe it's just because she was always dressed by MGM for many. That doesn't stop some people, of course, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't think yeah.
And there are jokes about that too. Someone said to Judy Garland, "Oh, I'm so glad you're here because I knew you'd look like hell," or something. Some other star. I can't remember who said it. It's in one of the bios. And Judy Garland would tell the story. She thought, those self-deprecating stories she would tell were so hilarious. I knew you'd look awful, so I'm going to stand right here next to you.
Okay.
Really mean.
So harsh. But you know, to that point, Halston, of course, is one of Liza's other mentors, and so
Mm,
I think like that's one of the things that she built on to distinguish herself from Judy was like emphasis on the body, on dancing, on fashion. You know, these are all things that were not really associated with her mother.
mm,
So that was really interesting, and I think smart of her to like build that out. You know, those things that
mm,
were unique to her. But you know, the voice is the voice, and it's got a lot in common with the Garland voice. And
mhm.
it's hard,
Yeah.
hard
Yeah.
not to hear the same.
Yeah. But she, she at least because she can just rely on it being such a different era, when you move into the 60s and 70s, that's even though Judy Garland goes on being, a star out until she dies, until she's, 1969, she was known for like really favoring her old standards and favorites, and people were often trying to persuade her to include some newer material, and she often didn't want to,
Yeah,
for who knows why. She'd had an absolute incredible memory, so it might not have been anything to do with that, but she
yeah.
just really felt safe and loved to do her standard numbers. So by the time, when you got your own composers working with you, and it's the 60s and 70s, and they
Mhm.
always think the sharpness of the break in the decades was also a big help. I mean, her cabaret affect is nothing like you'd
Totally.
ever think of Judy Garland as. Yeah.
No, 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 no. Yeah, it's a different characterization.
Mm.
Yeah, that was really interesting. So Mia Farrow is her good friend, and that
Oh
was
my
like
God, I had
really.
no idea. Just the last person I don't know why.
I know, but
Mm.
they were in the same preschool together. It turns
Yeah,
out.
which creates a bond,
Yeah, Mia Farrow's got this loving but like knowing, attitude towards Liza. And
Mhm,
she's like, wow, and I do believe this. It's kind of interesting to have it affirmed. She's like, Liza's like who you think she is. Like she really is, and sometimes like so naive, you can't
mhm.
believe it. Like especially with the men.
Oh, right, the man, oh, yeah.
And it's like you can't. You're like Liza. I don't know if that's the best choice.
Mm. No,
But Liza's just like, no, it's, every new romance is the solution to her life. And it's
mhm,
like she never gets wised up, but that's
mhm,
also part of Liza's charm is she never
mhm,
becomes cynical,
mhm. Yeah,
always starry eyed.
yeah.
I'm just like, when did you have time or God?
Oh, I know, and they
And
go really emphasizing this. There were lots and lots of men, and some of them were so incongruous that you're like, they really focus on the Peter Sellers thing, and he just looks like he's practically paralyzed from his drug use. He's too old. He's like, and she's just like, we're in love, and you're like, oh my
like,
what are you doing? But yeah, they really go through the train wreck love life kind of rapidly. As like, yeah, and then they interview her and she does say that. You're like, yeah, I thought everyone was gonna be it was like the rosy dream or whatever. I forget how she puts it, but it's very like, oh.
right. How can you still think that?
And the marriages are so awful, and
Oh,
well, not the first, the first one, he's gay, but so that's a problem. But at least she really loves him and everything, and he's not a bad person, it seems.
yeah.
But
Peter
still,
Allen, for those of you who don't know, like about whom The Boy from Oz was written. So
yeah,
he's gay, but like so spectacularly gay that
yeah,
there is a Broadway show about you.
right, right,
So,
right. And insisting, she really didn't know, and you're like, oh wow, but she does
Garland put them together.
put them together.
That was Judy's idea. So, I don't know what that's about. I don't know what it's about.
Yeah, there's no reason to go there. But that is, old trodden material. It's fascinating. It never stops being fascinating. You can't be helping fascinated.
Totally fascinating.
Oh
Yeah.
wow, yeah. So they do. So they don't dwell a huge amount. There's this the funny dismissal of the is it the last husband who's such a
Yes.
scumbag and everybody knows it. I think
Yes.
it's is it Michael Feinstein?
David Guest is
Oh,
her last
David.
husband.
Oh, David Guest is the last one.
Feinstein might as well be her last husband, but no, he's her friend
But
who.
he's the one who makes the comment about one of them, dismissingly about how
Yeah.
horrible, absolutely horrible he was. Yeah, yeah. So anyway, yeah, it's a mess.
And
But
no one ever asks her because she's cooperating with this documentary. No one's ever like, why are so many of the husbands gay?
yeah,
But I would, I'm kind of fascinated to know if she has a take on that. but no one's ever asked.
No one, yeah. It's a very sore subject, Certainly the Lorna Luft, the sibling, is just absolutely, dad was not gay or bi. They're just not having. And, Judy Garland's father, there is no evidence that he was gay. And you're like, isn't there though? But they just shut that down immediately. They will not have this multi-generational women marry gay men, and then it doesn't go well. Yeah.
I don't know. Who's such a nice man?
Yeah. Anyway. So it is interesting in that it really sticks to this pretty well, to this angle that they're taking, so you can see the development of Liza. And of course that means there's a ton of focus on her earlier career, because that's what you're looking mostly her early career, which is the most glorious phase of her career. So that's pleasant to watch. How much do you really want to see her be in crappy later movies? Certainly, not as much.
But there's no analysis of like the era. That's I think the thing, because as we were kind of hinting at, that's so important to the Liza stardom, and also Liza managed to be a superstar, famous for like old-timey singing and dancing in the 70s and into the 80s. And that's incredible, because she sings music that was written a good 60 years before her time. It's a very similar challenge that faces like Barbara Streisand, like they're doing an art form that is like past its prime. But it also, I think, is the reason that like Liza never became a big film star, is that the kinds of films she would be appropriate for were just like a dwindling genre. Like musicals barely existed. The musicals that do exist in the 70s, she's in like 50% of them, So, and then she gets put in all these kind of like shitty comedies. Arthur, I think, is her highest grossing film. And like, I'm sorry, Arthur's not that great. I think
I revisited it and I was just stunned at how bad it is. I had remembered it being a little better, a little funnier. It is just, wow. Yeah.
It was a massive hit.
Yeah, it was huge.
Yeah, and it sucks. It hasn't aged well. And she just plays like the chick, because those are the roles that are available to women in the 70s and 80s. So that would have been kind of interesting to contextualize. Like, Cabaret was such an anomaly and so exciting, but really her stardom like thrived on Broadway and on the concert stage. She is the queen of Broadway in the 70s and the 80s, and that's the kind of information you're not getting from this. If you were wondering like what she was doing in the 90s, you will not find out. So
huge gaps, absolutely.
Yeah.
And they touch on like the Studio 54, she becomes the queen of Studio 54. And that is an interesting thing. I mean, disco was this huge phenomena, but she did not, other than partying there.
Yeah.
Being one of the most familiar faces there, she did not do disco as far as I know. Thank God. Thank God. I mean, but she wasn't one of those awful things where she cut a disco record. I mean,
she did. There is one album called Tropical Nights. I love it.
Is it good?
Nights. They're ridiculous. It's good in the way that the Ethel Merman disco album is good. I mean,
no, that's the one thing. It was a thing. People cut, people who you just like, no, went out and did disco albums, and you're just like, yeah.
I enjoy Tropical Nights, but you're right. I mean, it's not like that was heavily marketed. It wasn't. It's not like, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But she was like shorthand for New York glamour, in the late 70s, between Halston and Studio 54, and being the queen of Broadway. I think all of that. So yeah. But it, so like overall, it's totally worth watching, and there are lots of high points, and it's like astounding to just like watch her do her thing, in her glory years. So like watch it for sure, but it's not going to be like an education.
Right. You're gonna, if you don't know anything, you're gonna come around going, and that's it's got glowing reviews, but that is the criticism. Like, you're just like not getting, the childhood is just like hardly, it's just not getting touched on. You're not getting big chunks
there.
of the life. So, but on the other hand, there's this sacrifice that seems like it has to be made if you want to have an angle at all on a person that's interesting and that can play. Because I was like, thank God, in a way, Because I mean, I'm familiar enough that I was like, oh God, we're gonna have to do the whole march. I'm gonna know every anecdote. And it was quite the contrary, just because of the focus was nice. Like I know nothing about, her relationship with who
And
Charles Aznavour. I was just like, I didn't really know. I knew of it, but I didn't know any details about it. So
Mhm.
stuff like that is just kind of fascinating. How in the building, how they're building blocks. From this person she gets this, from this person she takes this, from this person, and she's very proactive. It's not like she's tripping and falling over these people. She's like, no, I need this, so come and live with me to Kay Thompson, and I need you. She goes to find Charles Aznavour. She goes to France. Is like, I want to study you and work with you, and apparently have an affair. I want everything. I want the whole thing. And
Yeah,
she goes out and gets this stuff.
she does, and that's what you wouldn't think, right? But like
Yeah.
Liza's ambitious. It looks like she just stumbles into things. You
Mhm.
think she's Judy Garland's daughter. She just like somehow crashed
Mhm.
into success. No, like she plans it and
Yeah.
rehearses and works. So
Yes, and worked and seemed to have some instinct for, I might need this is what I might need next. This is what I might need. This is what I might need. So that was really interesting to see because when we think of stardom, we tend to think, or at least I do anyway. That's the most written about stardom is, of course, the most draconian and insane and spectacular version of it, which is Hollywood stardom in the studio era, where they built you
mhm.
and you did what you could to try to have autonomy and input and all that, but you had to fight awfully hard to get any because they were in the business of building stars and maintaining stars. So that was their bread and butter for them. So it's really a very different form where it's someone else going, no, I know I need I need help and I'm gonna go find it. So that was kind of nice, actually. That angle was nice and refreshing because you wonder about stars now. Most of them are terrible at this. You'll get some great talent come along, and you just sometimes will be like, God, sometimes I miss that there was a studio system and there was a whole way of getting the right vehicles that are tailored to them and the right look for them and all. And God knows they can't talk, and their interviews are often just dreadful, and there's no one to tell them. Maybe
Yeah,
don't say that kind of shit. Um, it takes there's this whole separate set of skills that have to do with just being a star,
right.
that are beyond, like, can you act, are you attractive, but there's a lot more to it, and this is a really nice illustration of how you can build stardom, knowing you can't do it on your own. It's too big. You become an industry, you know, in and of yourself, with all sorts of people who are living on your stardom, and that is part of it. But that there's someone to see someone put the blocks together themselves is very good. It's very interesting.
Definitely. And maybe this is a good segue into Rock Hudson,
Yeah,
who seemed much more assembled by his agent, but it
very much,
knew what he was doing.
very much. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Yes. Overall take on the all that heaven allowed, the Rock Hudson.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I was interested in this because I'm a fan of Rock Hudson, but I have not it's seen like his entire filmography. So
Mhm.
I was interested in how he got where he
Mhm.
ended up. Overall, I think it was good. It had it so I'm sorry, all that Heaven Allowed was is does give you a good overview of Hudson's career. It does focus on his gayness,
Mhm.
and I thought it did a really good job of. And one thing I found like really um, notable was how much his film career and the like content of his films like presage and can be read
Mhm.
backwards.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There's all about being queer, if
Yes,
not
so
explicit.
many of 'em.
Yeah,
To the point that you're like, they know. They
right.
know when they're writing it in. There's no way, because they used to do that. They were horribly cruel. They would use stars' lives all the time. So, Lana Turner, after her big scandal, where she's, her daughter is killed
Joey
with
Salpinato or
gangster
whatever.
boyfriend, and she's on trial, goes on to just suddenly be in movies where she's a traumatized mother on trial and stuff. And you're just like, that is so vicious. You shove her right into where she has to reenact her own tragedy. They did that all the time.
Yeah,
So yeah, after a while, you're like, when it's the third Doris Day movie and there's a million gay jokes, you're just like, man.
crazy, crazy.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. So seeing the film clips was like just like haunting, and
Mm.
um, what can I say? On the other hand, by the end of it, I found myself wanting to know more about Rock Hudson
Oh,
than his
yeah.
penis, right?
Mhm.
I was like, I get it. The guy's gay. He's
Yeah.
famous for he's famous for, you know,
Mhm.
our first celebrity with AIDS, his coming out, for those of
Mhm.
you who don't know or haven't watched yet, like, was the first public figure that people knew of who had AIDS. And then
Mhm.
Elizabeth Taylor came and like founded AMFAR.
Mhm.
But yeah, I found myself thinking like I would like to know more about him and just his love life,
Mhm.
So in general, I found it was informative. I found the like use of the clips like interesting and thought provoking in the way that they reflected his personal life. But at the end of the day, I wanted to know a little bit more about him
Mhm.
besides his sexuality. So
Yeah. I'm with you. The clear angle or the clear the thing that they have to work with here is they've got people who are claiming to be his lovers who are very elderly now.
yeah,
A number of them are, of course, have already passed, but some, he had a very, very active sex life. But anyway, and they have photos from their youth that if you have or home videos or whatever. So they've actually got people who are willing to talk about this private side of his life that he kept under wraps. And partly because he had to, of course, but among the more revealing moments were like I forget who it is who brings up is it Armistead
Armistead Maupin.
up and trying to kind of raise Rock Hudson's consciousness a little,
Yes,
says something about
if you
we
came
should have
out,
the right to you should come out and you should have the right to walk down the street holding hands with whoever this person you're involved with or kissing them or whatever, and Rock Hudson was just
what?
like not into this at all. And somebody said, he was so straight laced, which is an odd thing.
Yeah.
You're hearing about the wild parties and his first visit to the bathhouse, and he practically never came out. They're just like, and yet he's so straight laced, and they just meant he didn't seem to have any sense, as far as you could tell from this, that the world should work differently.
Hmm.
It was more like, no, I hide that part of my life. He was a Republican. He was buddies with the
Say
Reagans.
that. I
Oh,
don't
yeah.
remember it
Oh, yeah.
being.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
I did.
He's
Sorry,
a
my.
criminal, which I hadn't known. I was quite interested in that. I mean, I read the biography and I kept thinking, did they ever come right out and say that? And this might have been the first time anyone ever said it. But
Uh-huh.
they think they said, well, but he was that kind of default Republican. It was not like he was active or anything,
Yeah.
but he was. And he was, Nancy Reagan was a close friend of his, and the Reagans, he got along.
Nancy Reagan, who did not save him when he
Exactly.
called
He
on
then
her.
goes and betrays him. They with a snap of the what was it? They were trying to get him out of France when he was literally dying
I think they were first trying to get him into a
into
hospital in
France.
France that like had the capability to maybe deal with some aspect
Right.
of his
But they
illness.
needed a special plane or something.
They needed, he wasn't a French citizen, so they needed someone to advocate
Oh,
for him.
that was it. That was it.
Yeah.
And they could have done it with she could have done it with a wave of her hand. It's so many. And she's just like, I'm afraid that's not the sort of thing we can be involved. And you're like, he's your friend. You sicko. I mean, this is don't become friends with people like Nancy Reagan. Just
Yeah,
don't do it.
exactly.
But there's this sense of like, I literally was watching it going, is it that they don't know how to represent who he is because he's not knowable? When you
Maybe.
have Doris Day, there's an interview with Doris Day.
Hmm.
It's very short because clearly she has nothing to say. They're like quizzing her on, well, did you know he was gay? And she was just like, I didn't know anything about his personal life. I didn't know. She's multiple movies with him. And if you read her own autobiography, he was her favorite co-star. She adored him. You to get none of this in the interview.
Right.
He loved him. She was just like, she thought of him as a great friend of hers. And there's no anecdotes about how perfectly they worked together, how, they had nicknames for each other. They both hated their phony stage names. Her
Uh-huh.
real name was Doris Kappelhoff. She thought Day was the phoniest. Somebody, I think her agent came up with it saying Kappelhoff won't even fit on the marquee. She was still a singer then.
Uh-huh.
And said, you have to do this. She's like, oh, fine. But she really always hated it. And he always hated Rock Hudson and thought it was the stupidest name. So he called her, I know, Eunice. And she called him something equally like,
Yeah.
Ernie or something, a plumbery kind of name. And they always called each other that. And they were just devoted, they'd get together. But then you hear this and you're like, did they ever see each other outside? You start to think maybe not. Like, what does friendship mean? To
Right.
people whose lives are rigidly private. It's another generation. Privacy was a real thing.
Mhm.
But was it that much of a thing? That did she really know him? And all she says is, "All I know is he was a very nice man." It's the most insipid thing, and you're just like, that's all you have to say about your favorite co-star and your supposed great friend. Just like, that is piss.
Multiple films.
Multiple films and huge, big hits. They were a team. They were reunited several times because they worked so perfectly. It's just like, wow.
Crazy.
So that's what I started to think. Is he just the unknowable Rock Hudson? I
Maybe.
mean, was that part of the cost of compartmentalization or
Mhm.
what? It just seems like there's a kind of colorlessness that you're trying to see filled in somehow, and you're like, yeah. And I don't know if it's the documentary, and there's only so much they could unearth. But even the people who were his lovers don't seem like they, he was fun to be with.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't get a lot.
Right. You don't get to know about his hopes and dreams, really.
Yeah.
I think the one thing I learned he hoped for was like an Oscar for Giant.
No Giant, because he knew it was probably his only chance, because he wasn't taking that seriously. There's only a couple of times where he really breaks through. And that I thought was a real problem with the documentary. They don't really address seriously his limitations. And
Yeah.
that when he did break through, how astonished everybody was. I mean, he was clearly this heartthrob who'd been manufactured as a heartthrob. I mean, he just was so manifestly like that era of 50s star that looks like they assembled him in a factory. Which they kind of did. They
did.
He was taught how to walk, how to talk, how to, they all were. But in his case, admittedly, there were things that they had to take. It's in his biography. They were worried because he talked a certain way, and they felt it was too high, and so they had to lower his voice. It was very much guarding against anything that might reveal that he seemed effeminate in any way. So they were terrified of anything like this. So they trained him into a much more kind of butch way of being. So I don't know. So they're conveying that, but they're not getting across. Like, he literally had a miserable time learning lines. I mean, I know more than this movie is telling me, having read about him and stuff. Like, he had a monstrously bad time, which you don't usually hear about actors. You tend to hear about the actors who are like Judy Garland and read it once and they know it, and they know everyone else's part too. These kind of brilliant people. And he struggled, and they say something like they quote him saying he always wanted to be an actor. I think it's in an interview.
Right.
But he didn't. Of course, he was in a small town in kind of rural Illinois. He just never said so because he didn't want to be bullied further for a kind of, again, effeminate desire, career goal. And so he never said anything. But in fact, he did try out for plays, but he couldn't memorize lines, so he would lose parts. So in fact, were these attempts to be an actor while he was still growing up. So it's a little bit. And it's definitely iffy when it seems to take for granted that he was a great talent or something. And I'm like, super stiff, super wooden. Everyone could see it, and he got better, but he had to work at it. And he needed directors like Douglas Sirk. But what did Douglas Sirk say? You have to plant him like an oak in the middle of the scene. You let other people act around him. That is the best way. And it's true if you look at Written on the Wind. I mean, not Written on the Wind. All That Heaven Allows. That's exactly. You play him. He has hardly any lines. He's the nature man. So he doesn't talk a lot, and other people, act all around him, and that's exactly right. And there's something called Tarnished Angels. It's a lesser known Cirque, where he actually has a much bigger, showier part, and you're kind of going, he's okay. He's always likable. That is one thing. He's always very likable
and watchable. I'm always happy when Rock Hudson's in a movie. Yeah,
he is a real star. You will compulsively watch him. You will, and of course, when he gets into, they barely deal with the revelation of his comic gifts. This is where he's finally on solid ground. He starts doing comedies, and he's great. He's excellent. And you're like, why wouldn't you make more of that? Instead, it's like Seconds. Yes, everyone knows Seconds, but they keep harping on the same chord. People want to talk about Seconds because that's the really dark sci-fi-ish one about someone who hates their life, feels completely repressed in this kind of 50s successful businessman, successfully married, successfully this, but he's alienated from his whole life, so he finds a way to be just redone whole new face, gets placed in another community as a younger man, looks completely different, starts all over again, and then finds out once again he's been built into another life that's equally fictional. And so it sounds like a commentary. Everyone reads it like this, a very common, as a commentary on Rock Hudson's life that must have been tormenting. And supposedly there was a scene where he had to play drunk, and he really kind of lost it in this scene. And it was too personal. That was the rumor, or the word from some people. He actually was really losing it in that scene. It was too much. So they'll always talk about Seconds and how great he is, but they keep wanting to go back to say why, because it's revealing of who he really is as a gay man, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, he just gets better as an actor. I think Giant, he's actually quite good. I don't know how much that has to do with Elizabeth Taylor, who's also excellent. So good in that movie. And she helps him, I think, frankly. It seems to me that their scenes together as they age, she's great at pretending to be old when you can see she's 25. They just put bluing in her hair. That's all they do to him. They give him some padding and give him some bluing in his hair, and you're just like, yeah, all right, let's say you're old. Okay. But, they both find ways to act at least middle age, at least being older, and they both do a good job. And you're like, wow, he seems better in this. And I think it's partly her. But at any rate, the milestones are like very few and far between, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of analytical interest in his performance beyond what it reveals about, again, gay man living this kind of strange bifurcated life.
Yeah.
Which I think that fascination, because of that I wish they'd gone more into, but if he wasn't that troubled, and is that really true? Or was he just acting that way? If he was honestly not that troubled. Like, I know I'm essentially a small town guy. I kept a lot of those values. A lot of them are kind of corny, but I'm kind of in a way, I'm kind of a straight guy.
Yeah.
In a lot of my attitudes.
Totally. I just have a lot of sex with men.
And I have a lot of sex with men. And it doesn't seem to be a problem. I'm rich. I'm famous. I achieved everything I ever wanted. I've achieved more than I ever wanted.
Yeah.
I mean, the one thing you might say is, that whole Henry Wilson thing, which is so sordid. Henry Wilson's the agent who became notorious as a predator. He'd practically meet every train, pick out the handsomest hunk of beefcake, and basically demand sexual favors in exchange for roles. They indicate, bizarrely in the movie, that almost his only success is Rock Hudson. He's very successful. I have there's tons of people that they got careers. Tab Hunter, Robert Wagner, Troy Donahue, Rory Calhoun, John Saxonby, Clint Walker. I'm getting less famous as I go, but if you know showbiz of the 50s and 60s, you know all these people. Nick Adams, Guy Madison, John Derrick, Chad Everett, Mike Connors. There's a quote it's not in the movie, from Natalie Wood, who said, it became a stigma. Because pretty soon, if he was your agent, it was simply the assumption of any man, and it was pretty much sounded like it was just a stable of men, that you were either gay or bi. And she said something like, it might as well have been tattooed on your forehead. And pretty soon people started disassociating from him. Didn't want him, and he dies broke and everything else. He comes to a very sad end, but he deserves to come to a sad end. He's horrible. He's a horrible, horrible man.
Yeah.
And so presumably all these people, and that might be part of the tat. You assume he was demanding that, and they were having to basically service this nasty guy to get anywhere in Hollywood. And that's a long roster. And he also had no trouble sacrificing. So Rock Hudson is his biggest star.
Yeah.
All of them. And when Confidential magazine is going to out Rock Hudson, and they do bring that up, he throws under the bus Tab Hunter. Hunter, who was also a surprisingly big star for a couple of years. His career is curtailed. I guess he went to they called it a pajama party, an all-male pajama party or something. So he gave that to Confidential, and they don't mention that he also stymied Rory Calhoun's career because he had done jail time. And his mugshots make him look really like a bad, scary dude. And so that did a lot to kill his career, which was on the way up. So he threw two for the price of one, essentially, to save Rock Hudson. I'll make a deal with you. You can kill these two careers, and we get to keep Rock Hudson. So that kind of thing, if you're basically a nice guy with small town values, has got to have been awful. Really awful. But he obviously didn't talk about it, or if he did, nobody mentioned
his personality at all, except that it's fun-loving.
Yeah, he's a fun-loving, nice man. But even in his interviews, you just feel like you're not getting. It's like nothing's coming across.
Yeah, and maybe there's no there there. That
It
is the question.
makes you wonder, is there much there, or was he so compensated by what the way of life he got to have that
Perhaps.
that because it's interesting that at the end of his life, I mean, the only quote they have, and maybe there's more, where it's coming out. There's no longer any way to disguise that he has AIDS, and that his life as a gay man is coming out because of it. Not that you had to be gay, but it was of a piece. It was coming out all at once. And he just groaned to someone. He's practically on his deathbed saying, what a way to end a life. I mean, in other words, he couldn't see anything like, but really, this is a great way to end a life. Like,
Uh-huh.
I am going to do such a great thing inadvertently, but it's going to be a massive amount of help to a lot of other gay people and just a lot of other people. This service I'm doing inadvertently through this, and of course having his friend Elizabeth Taylor, they were great friends, be his champion and all that. You'd think, but if if he ever changed his mind or felt that way, I don't know. Did they say anything? I don't think they did.
No, well, yes, at some point,
Oh,
Hollywood.
he does. He makes a public statement. That's
Yeah,
right.
Burt Lancaster read a
Read
letter
it.
he wrote where he did
And
seem
and
to
it
really
is like, if I
sign.
can achieve anything through my death, blah, blah, blah. And that is the right attitude. But you wonder if his private attitude was just, they've ruined it. They've ruined what I achieved, which the other quote kind of makes it sound like. So you do come away going, that's exactly what I thought. Like, I feel like I don't know him, and I'm beginning to think maybe he just wasn't knowable.
Yeah, but on the other hand, I don't think that the film is seeking Rock Hudson.
It
It's
doesn't seem like it is.
it's really about the closet, and his
Yeah.
life as a gay man, which is fine. That's it's a fair topic for a documentary. It's
Mhm.
just that it kind of leads you to want to know how he thinks and feels about all these things.
And I wish they would have said it. It would have been better to frame it like, he Rock Hudson offers a window into, and you could have added, for all I know, there just really isn't the information.
Right.
That if they were friends who, like perhaps Elizabeth Taylor, that he unburdened himself to, they didn't talk. They
Yeah.
didn't say so.
Yeah.
So I don't know, that could be that, but it just would have been nice to make it clearer for you. Because again, yeah, you wind up going, God, who the hell is this
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Big.
it really is odd. Its attitude toward his talent, taking for granted that he's just this great gifted. I'm just like, there's an early movie he was in where he's working, and it's supposed to be the 1920s, and
Yeah.
he's a soda jerk, and actually in a bit part, James Dean is at the counter, and someone's saying, "Well, I just thought it was beneath him," and I'm like, beneath him?
Yeah.
Even they show stills from some of his action adventure films, and they're ludicrous. I mean, until like he becomes a star with Magnificent Obsession, he's in just nonsense of all kinds. I mean,
Right. Deep is cool, so.
yeah, I mean, beneath him, it's just like, where do they get these people? But anyway, whatever. I mean, you've even got Rock Hudson saying later about Dynasty.
Yeah.
Obviously they're fascinated with he's got AIDS. People don't know, and he has to do a big kissing scene with Linda, and he's desperately keeping his mouth shut. People don't know how AIDS is I'm trying to say communicated. That's not the word. Caught.
Yeah.
Yeah, passed from one person to another. So there's a panic over it. But he thought that was a great. The scripts were great. I'm like, from Dynasty. So
Rock's
I
a
think
little basic, and that's okay. That's okay, Rock.
that's fine. If he was just fine with Hollywood entertainment, he was probably a much happier man.
Totally.
I mean, because he did all sorts of silly action adventures. He was teamed with Piper Laurie before she became a serious actress. She was a
Right.
starlet, and they were in a bunch of, I don't know, crazy. I don't know. I haven't seen any of those. I should try to find one. They look ludicrous, but I mean, in that fun Hollywood way, where they don't care if it's ludicrous. It's fantasy. It's fun.
Right.
Which is fine. I actually always hoped this. I hope he felt that way. And there is a touching quote from him in something else, not in the documentary, where he says, I know it sounds corny, but the biggest joy of my life has been knowing that ordinary people go in and they watch my movies, and they have a good time. And that's just, yeah, it means so much to me. And you're just like, oh, and then you really do like him again, because that's just sweet. That's a real sweet small town guy's value that has never changed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Let's pretend that is what he thinks, and that is
Yeah.
how we remember him.
Just so we'll enjoy ourselves,
That's what you
more.
should know about.
Yeah, but I guess that is it. It seems like we're trying. The movie is kind of trying to make him more. It's kind of like he must be tortured, or he must be, if not tortured, just having to be in the closet must mean dot dot dot, and it keeps kind of not meaning that, or at least in my.
Exactly. I think you're pointing at, and maybe there's one way we can bring this together.
Yeah.
The Rock Hudson documentary seeks to air out the closet, as you say, to tell all, and it ends up telling very little.
Yeah.
And Liza, her documentary is quite guarded about her personal life, but I think that we come away feeling like we know her, So it's just, just airing the dirt of like who you slept with, even though it's often posited as like the ultimate truth of someone's life, it's not.
No, that's exactly it. It seems so unenlightening. And you're thinking, oh, fine, we're going to find out what he was like when he didn't have to be hiding.
Right.
And it doesn't sound like he was any different other than they're having sex. But I mean, it doesn't, there's no description that makes you go, oh, that's what he was really like. No. So yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that said, the standard for documentaries about like movies that are, biographical art, it's not high.
No, it's not.
Like the books that I read, the biographies that I read, very, very low bar. Very low bar. They're usually very generic marches. They usually have no angle. They usually have no structure beyond the one that you just birth to death it. And why they're significant is somehow wrapped around and by. That's all, folks. Right. So it tends to be very, very rote, and they just rely on, obviously, it's a famous person or a formerly famous person, so you'll be interested. And so, they tend to suck. Yeah.
Well, and all movie star biographies they promise you behind the scenes, right? They promise skeletons in the closet.
You're finally going to know.
Documentary, yeah. And I think this is like a nice, I don't know, it's a nice reminder that just because you know the dirt doesn't mean that you know any sort of truth.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's absolutely right. Yes.
Yeah. So
and also, this is nerdy of me, but often there would be so much fascination for me to have more about like his work life. I find his struggle to learn lines fascinating.
Totally.
Absolutely fascinating.
I'm a movie star if you can't learn lines.
If you can't learn lines, to the point that I guess his first one-line bit, I think they say this in the documentary, but it's a kind of a famous thing. It took him 38 takes. He couldn't get one line. And it's partly he was just terrified. He was just terrified. But it sounds like it persisted after, initial terrors went away. He went on having a problem. Exactly. How do you even... I mean, that's kind of major. So what happened anytime he had to make a big dramatic speech? That must have just been hell, knowing that hanging over your head, that you're not going to remember your lines. I mean, movies help you a lot. It's not the stage. But yeah.
The work is so much more interesting.
It's so much more interesting, and it almost always gets skimmed over very, very carelessly. So one of my favorite documentaries, just as an example of a very firm angle on something and focus, is it's another American Masters, and it came out in 1986, and it's called it's about Charlie Chaplin. It's called Unknown Chaplin, the Master at Work, and it's just his work method, and it's simply because they found a cache of film, because he had, while he was making films, he was having that filmed. So they had filmed reel after reel after reel of him at work, and he's a maniac. I mean, he will work a scene. I mean, 150 takes in City Lights, in the scenes that are the most beautifully smooth, 150 takes, and him showing actors exactly how to act it. And then now you do. And if literally he had his own studio, his whole studio would come to a halt, literally a halt. If he had to he hardly ever missed a day, of course. He was a complete workaholic, a maniac. Mm-hmm. But occasionally something would happen, like he'd have to go to court because he'd impregnated somebody, a teenager or something. A very ugly sex life. But that's the thing isn't interested in that. It's just, let's just look at him working, because it's so interesting. And they'd just sit around. They'd have to sit around and wait till he came. He was such an auteur, and people say, there's no such thing. Yeah, watch this. Watch that. He does everything. It's not that anything's written, he writes it. He starts. He directs. He composes the music. He edits. I swear to God, he sweeps the place out after. It's crazy. He would work so hard that his valet would have to come and assist him out of his car because he couldn't get out of the car. His legs had stopped working because he'd done so much. But anyway, so you can just watch him like trying to get one scene in the City Lights over and over, and all the adjustments and all the fussing and all the, or it's leading lady Edna Provides in one of the shorts, and she's just rolling her eyes as he's rearranging the props on the table for the 99th time, and it's just mad. But on the other, it's also fascinating to see him rework gags. Nope, it's not working. And because he was so successful and he financed his own movies and he had his own distribution, he was a partner in a distribution company. No, in other words, he had no one bossing him.
Right.
So if he wanted to say the problem is the set, and he'd spent a fortune on the set, he could just tear down the set and rebuild. And he does. And it's one movie. He's like, nope, the hotel lobby is all wrong. Tear it all down. Start for a gag.
Oh my goodness.
So that kind of thing is just like, for me, like, I am just agog, but it's unfortunately rarely of interest. So
Yeah.
you're right, like finding out Liza Minnelli has scoliosis and they designed stances and moves around a slight imbalance in her postures and stances. It's just like, this is exactly, I need this information. I want to know how it was done. That's the kind of behind the scenes that I really love.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. But that's rare. So there you go.
Wow. So these are both of the documentaries are negotiating the closet. I think Liza's comes out better for not giving us a peek inside.
Yeah. Well, then, that kind of, how do you build a career? How do you build stardom? How do you build, that kind of inner workings? But that's as far as it goes. So yeah, I much preferred, I have to say, the Liza Minnelli. I found the Rock Hudson quite frustrating.
Yeah.
You literally find out he has a huge dick and you're like, Rex Reed's got a hilarious review where he's just shocked. He's horrified. Such prurience. It's just disgusting. And it's not revealing. Rex Reed. Like,
oh my God.
Of all people to be shocked and be saying there's no excuse for this sort of thing.
What in the world?
Hilarious. I know. I only read a few of the reviews and it's mostly well reviewed. Again, there's just these knee jerk, you could spit out, I swear to God, almost any kind of documentary and people be like, yeah, it's good. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
But I thought that was very funny. But at the same time, your point is well taken. So now we know that. What do we know? So it was in proportion with the rest of him. He was
exactly.
He was 6'4" or something. And,
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, on that point.
What PBS? Get on the doc. You can wait on the Rock if you want. Or
yeah. And I think since it's 2023, I'm assuming it's just hanging out there. So any rush to see that. And not everyone has our burning interest in Rock Hudson. I think we can safely say.
Believe that. Who's uninterested in Rock Hudson?
Oh, come on! There's something so fascinating just about starting with being named Rock Hudson.
Exactly.
Yes.
Get interested in Rock Hudson.
Yeah, come on. All right, I'm going to wrap this up. And that is it for this episode we are calling Liza and Rock Docs. It's the only title I've ever made up that I've liked, so I'm sticking with it. Thank you, dear listeners, and of course, triple thanks to our subscribers who keep us in sequins and closets. Closets. If you're not a subscriber, but you like what you hear, please consider signing up with Patreon for all the Film Side content instead of just the half that's available to the public already. Also note that half of our episodes are now available to you to view on YouTube. This will be one of them in just a couple of days. Goes live on Tuesday afternoon. And you can follow news of the podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Blue Sky. We've ditched X, which I think is only right. So don't look for us there. We won't be there.
Look for us there. We're not there.
Yeah, we're not there. Join us in 2 weeks for more fantabulous Film Side content. And until then, vaya con Dios. Mwah.
We love you.
We love you.